Hello, comrades. Welcome to, no, I have to sit because of the live stream, sorry. Welcome to this year's Communist University 2025. It's going to be a bit different than previous communist universities. It's going to have a cultural aspect to it, which we're going to get into thanks to Comrade Tam. It's also going to be rather different compared to what we had planned about 4 or 5 months ago when we were starting to put the timetable together. So we set out running Communist University as a joint enterprise with 3 organizations of the communist fusion process. It was called, as comrades know, Building Communist Unity. And for a while, it certainly looked like there would be a realistic chance, or at least a positive possibility of a fusion or a merger process developing. 3 organizations involved were drafting the first draft program for Communist University together, and the schedule for this week still reflects that. So it might feel a bit odd in places because we planned various roundtables, which are sort of, become a bit smaller than we originally planned. But we still wanted to go ahead and with discussing some of the issues that we originally had tried. So a strength from my point of view of the CPGB is its honesty. And I think we have to honestly say that this is what we've experienced a failure, I think, with the end of the communist fusion process. And I'm sure it's going to come up throughout this week. It's been disheartening for many comrades, including myself. I rejoined the CPGB as part of the communist fusion process. I'm not uncritical of the CPGB, but it clearly is, from my perspective, the most serious organization when it comes to issues around how communists should organize, on what platform and what kind of democracy we need. So, we all make mistakes. We can learn from them and try and get better. And I think Communist University will be one opportunity to do that. I think we need to take whatever we can from this process and learn some lessons about what went wrong, what we can do better in future, because I think the task really remains absolutely crucial. We desperately need communists, Marxists to organize in the same organization, getting our act together, overcoming our preciously held differences, which are often little more than ideological nuances, and build what we actually need: a communist party worthy of the name, with real democracy that can act as a powerful fist, but also allows differences and therefore must include the right to form factions and have democracy. So we are still hoping that all 3 organizations who were part of the communist fusion process will be represented here. To be honest, we're not entirely sure it will happen, but we do want to discuss person to person, face to face, some of the issues that have come up. And I think personally, it's not just a personal opinion. I think it's a real shame that talking about socialism has pulled out before the start of Communist University, because while articles and written statements, they are important, and it's important to clarify issues, but I think there would have been a lot of room to clarify some issues at Communist University. And I'm really convinced that face-to-face discussions and talking to comrades can help with overcoming some of those issues, discussions outside meetings, discussions inside meetings. And perhaps, that is perhaps one of the lessons we should look into. Was there too much of these are the discussions between the leaderships, and there was very little else in terms of the members to talk about the politics of a merged organization, perhaps. We'll get into it throughout this week. Of course, we will be discussing the need for communist unity as part of the new Corbyn party, Corbyn Sultana party, left party, whatever it's going to be called. That is, no doubt, will be a red thread running through this week. Just like the issue of Palestine, the Middle East will be informing everything we're discussing tonight. These are, I think, 2 of the key challenges, not just for us this week here, but also for communists in the next period. As I mentioned before, we have all this week a really good cultural program, thanks to Comrade Tam here in the front, who's done a brilliant job, I think, pulling together a program varied program of, well, communist culture, really, which is something we haven't really done for a long time. So I think that's a really positive step forward. Tonight, for example, we'll be looking at Bertolt Brecht's version of the Communist Manifesto. And Tam will be reading from it every morning before we start Communist University, 10 a.m. We'll have a short few minutes with Tam reading bits of it, which I'm very much looking forward to it. A few housekeeping items for comrades who are staying the week. This will be particularly of interest. There's a canteen in the basement, which is very cheap. You can have breakfast and lunch there. In the evenings, we've booked the Thirsty Communist, it's called the Thirsty Scholar, a bar around here from 8 p.m. and we can have food there. There's also lots of bars, cafes, pubs around here that we do encourage comrades to hang out after the sessions. It kind of, helps clarify issues and it builds collectivity. Talking about that, if you are feeling a bit lost or you don't know where to go, what to do, Laurie, who'll be joining us tomorrow, and Ian, there he is, and Comrade Jim, there he is. They're our designated buddies. So if you need any help going anywhere, don't know what to do, where to go, ask them too, please. Bob there, and again, Ian are in charge of payments. See them, please. Anne, who's on her way. She's coordinating the chairing of the sessions. Stan here is in charge if anything goes wrong with your room. He looks surprised. No, he's not. He knew it. With accommodations, see him. If there's anything technical you need sorting, AV or something doesn't work, see Jake here and Berg. Wave, you two, there you go, there you go. Also, if you require AV for your presentation. Any other problems, and I'm sure there aren't any, see Yasmin or myself. There's Wi-Fi in the room, you can see it on your tables. If you're staying overnight, there will be different Wi-Fi in your rooms. Please switch off your phones for sessions or all hell is breaking loose. We are live streaming all sessions of Communist University. We've got a Zoom meeting set up as well. So try to, not to be too noisy or too rowdy. You know what commies are like. So over to our first session. As I said, this was supposed to be a round table with all three organizations involved in the Building Communist Unity process, Forging Communist Unity process. One organization hasn't shown up, unfortunately. We're hoping they're going to be joining us tomorrow and Saturday and Sunday. But as we said, the task remains: how do we build communist unity, meaningful communist unity, how we deal with differences, etc. And we want to continue this discussion throughout the week. So we're very pleased with to have with us today Kat Rylance from Prometheus editorial board, the faction that was in favor of building communist unity, and Jack Conrad from the CPGB. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you. Yeah, obviously, I think initially we designed this talk in a particular manner, which it's not going to look like anymore. So it's essentially, I suppose, a bit of an evaluation or a post-mortem of the process to see, I guess, what we can learn from it and what possibilities there might be going forward. I've stepped back from Prometheus, but I will talk about sort of my involvement during that time. Yeah, I've put in a lot of criticisms of TAS, and I thought that they were going to be here, and I would prefer to address my criticisms directly to people, so I kind of apologise on that behalf, because I would rather just have those discussions out directly. I've also put in a lot of criticism to the CPGB, as I've said many times before, but it probably bears repeating. These are not criticisms trying to get one up on you or trying to get one over on you or whatever it might be. These are invested criticisms because this is the trend that I also identify with. This is the project that I also identify with. And I'm very invested in us collectively as a whole seeing some success out of this. So I feel like it's my duty to criticise. If I see issues, it's our duty to criticise. It's our duty to try to think about how we can do better. So I hope you bear that in mind when you hear my criticisms. That's the perspective that I'm coming from. So I'll just give a little bit of background to the process, or at least my own perspective on the process before it began. So I came to Communist University about 2 years ago, and I actually came with the intention of getting back involved with the CPGB. So I used to be a member about 15 years ago, and I intended to get back involved. And this is, I don't want to be harsh here, but I was quite worried about what I saw when I came to Communist University, because to me, this trend, as Tina said, this trend is important. This project is important. I was very worried about the longevity of this project, because what I saw looked very different to when I'd been a member a long time ago. There was obviously lower numbers. That's not something that you can always insulate yourself from. But I didn't see that there'd been a process of reproducing a leadership, a process of caderisation, a process of investment in the new leadership who would take over. I didn't see that that was in place. And I also, you know, understandably, as a result of experiences with the Labour Party and so on, there was an element of maybe conservatism about the prospects of the project, about who you could engage with, about looking out within the left. Conservatism about the prospects of the project, about who you could, as I was saying, looking out at other forces on the left and thinking about what they represent, thinking about what the changes and development of different forces on the left represents, about how we can interact with that and engage with that, about what might be meaningful in the development of trends in different organisations, interacting on a small individual scale with us on the left. I see those things around me, and I feel like that, to me, is a significant thing that we should be paying attention to, trying to work actively to develop a strategy to push this project forward. And I didn't see that, and that's why I wrote into the Weekly Worker with a lot of criticisms around that question of strategy, around the need to have an active strategy, not to retreat into or get into a bunker mentality because the state of the left is so poor that we retreat into a kind of not hostility, but not seeing any opportunity in anything around us. So I thought, you know, because I care about this project, because I want to see some success here, because I think it's important, I wanted to push to try to, I don't know, shake things up a bit, try to provoke through criticism. And that was the purpose of that engagement. And I know that I wasn't received in that way. It was received possibly as an attack. And I think a lot of the time when we make criticisms of each other, that is the way it's received. And, you know, when the Weekly Worker makes criticisms of others on the left, often it's just received as a blanket attack, not an attempt to transform, not an attempt to engage. But that's the perspective that I was coming from in that respect. So I wanted to push for some kind of active strategy to move forward with this project. And at the same time, I engaged with TAS, and I was involved in Prometheus. I tried to put forward the arguments that we should be actively looking towards each other, actively trying to consider the immediate practical prospects of unity, of some kind of engagement, even if that engagement looks more small scale initially and isn't organisational unity, trying to take each other seriously and trying to engage seriously. And that wasn't always an easy argument to have, particularly with TAS, who I think because of historical reasons with the socialist platform and so on, there is a significant amount of hostility maybe, and a lack of trust between the organisations. So having that argument with TAS was quite a difficult one, and mostly was ignored until late last year. TAS held a open public meeting. I think it was December time. Or it might have been November maybe. And put forward a talk saying we need to be looking at our immediate trend, those who are close to us politically, and thinking practically about moving forward with organisational unity, and then pushing forward to other trends within the left. And they identified in that the CPGB, which seemed like a big shift to me. There was a big shift. So that was a talk that Ed gave. And Nick was very supportive of it too. So that was, for me, I suppose, quite a surprise, but obviously extremely positive one. And then through Y Marks, Tina kind of initiated discussions between the different groups to have an educational programme. And as you know, we pushed forward from that on the initiative of TAS to move forward to organisational unity. So obviously I was very enthusiastic about it and very positive about it, but it did seem like a big shift to me because not too long ago, TAS have been saying, look, we can't deal with the CPGB, we can't come and talk at OCF, we can't engage in discussions with them because the culture represents too significant a barrier to seriously engage with each other on that basis. So I thought it was a shift, but I was very positive about it as a result. I guess I had worries from the start about the dynamics that might have existed pushing against unity. So I expressed these to Ed very early on because I thought, you know, I suppose if you express it and try and get ahead of it, maybe you can push against it in some ways. So on TAS's side, I feel bad saying this because they're not here. I'd prefer to just say it directly, but you know, I was concerned that there might be reasons found to escape from the process, and that these might not be substantial, but if things weren't going the way, there might be reasons or excuses found for why unity wasn't possible. But also on the side of the CPGB as well, I do think there was an investment in unity, but there's also, by unity falling apart, there is also some benefit to the CPGB as well. And I'm not saying that this means that there's an investment in it falling apart, but if you think about the position of receiving external critique, you're not pushing forward the project of communist unity, you're not taking this project forward. Okay, well, let's put it on the table, let's go forward with this, and then other people drop out. Then you kind of maintain the position of being the only ones who are serious about communist unity. So it sort of silences external criticism in practice. So I do think that the CPGB were invested in the process working, but there is also a dynamic in which, even if it doesn't work, there's a kind of benefit to the organisation and the project as a result of that. Okay, so I'll do some evaluation, extremely negative evaluation of the project, and then I'll try and finish off with maybe some things that we could learn from it. First of all, to say, I think it was a mistake for TAS to pull out, which I've said to them. And I think that it was a real missed opportunity. I think when we had our day school in Manchester, we saw a lot of the opportunity that might be the conversations that we had there. For me, were really valuable. Were really valuable and really useful. And I feel that very quickly we would have gone beyond our small parts. A lot of us maybe don't get on with each other and maybe rub each other up the wrong way. And that is magnified so intensely when the numbers are so small. But very quickly we would have been able to move beyond that somewhat. And as a result, been able to approach it maybe in a way that would have been more productive in the long term. I felt very hopeful about if we managed to make it to that point, it would go far beyond the sum of our parts. For me, it was never really about these small parts, but about what we could become as a project together. So I do feel extremely gutted, and I do feel like it was a big missed opportunity. There's maybe different reasons why this occurred, and I'll kind of go through some of them. Just to say as well, I think part of the opportunity that it represented organisationally, it would have cohered a partyist trend into some kind of force that would have been able to intervene practically. But it would also have been a kind of beacon for the project that we're arguing for. It would have represented in practice a confirmation of the argument we're trying to make to the rest of the left. We're trying to tell people, look, no matter how much we might struggle with each other and not get on with each other, or we might have political differences with each other, we're outlining a project by which we can actually be in the same organisation. We can be different tendencies in the same organisation. That was the strength of what we were trying to do with that. But its failure is unfortunately the opposite. It's ammunition in the hands of people who will say, look, it's never going to happen. You can argue for democracy, you can argue for programme, these are great things, but your arguments for regroupment are a waste of time because the left is so divided and so antagonistic towards each other that that's never going to be realistic. And the failure, our failure to make this process work is without a doubt, to me, ammunition to people who are putting forward those arguments. So in that respect, I do worry that we've actually done damage by not making this work. And that is a weight of responsibility, I think, that we have to deal with. What time have I?
You've only spoken 15 minutes, so easy.
10.
10.
And I think in TASS's short leaving statement, they said, and I'm just again presenting some critique here, they said, well, we don't think that this is going to happen. We don't think this is going to work. We're going to pursue communist unity with others. And I critiqued them on this and sort of wrote to them and replied to them on this. I think when we talk about communist unity, we're not just talking about joining up with some people that you're working with. We're not just talking about two groups coming together. When we're talking about communist unity, we're trying to argue for a project. We're trying to articulate a vision by which the left as a whole could be in the same party as each other. We're trying to articulate the idea of a multi-tendency party under programmatic unity. It is not simply the act of just coming together with whoever is around you. And that is, again, I suppose, one of the failures here. It's not just that we weren't able to come together and strengthen our forces. That would have been great, but it's about the argument that we're making for communist unity. And that is, for me, the most serious and most important thing that is at stake in that situation as well. And trying to show in practice that we can make it work, that it is a possibility, and that we have some kind of practical commitment to that. And I think within Prometheus, we had a lot of discussions and debate around whether we wanted to be involved in the FCU process. And I think for those of us who did want to be involved, that was one of the arguments that we tried to put forward. We're publishing stuff around communist unity. We're making these arguments about regroupment, showing in practice and having that practical application represents an opportunity to make those polemical arguments through our practice, to try to show to others on the left, showing that we can have these debates and differences openly, that we can have these, challenging experiences, but come together with others through that. For me, it represented that practical opportunity, which is, one of the arguments that we put forward there. Okay, so I'll do some evaluation of, I think, some of the challenges and some of the issues that emerged. So obviously there were the political and programmatic issues. I think on the one question that I think was important was the question of whether programme is something that we agree or something that we accept. And I think initially there was an articulation from TASS that it's important for us in the FCU process to work out where we agree. Absolutely, I think that that's very important. But behind that needs to be the argument that unity is based on acceptance of programme. If we don't have that, I think it has implications for the project of communist unity, for the idea and the prospects of a multi-tendency party that we're trying to put forward. I think, again, as a criticism of TASS, I didn't at least ever feel that there was full clarity on what exactly they were saying about that, whether it was something that was important for the FCU process to be doing, or whether it was a different conception of how we treat and approach programme. I did express that I didn't think it was clear, and maybe it was something that they were working out in the process, and maybe that's fair enough too, but I certainly didn't feel clear on that aspect. And I do think that that is something that is quite significant, because I do think it has significant implications for the type of party and organisation we would be able to sustain through that. I think obviously there were political differences on the transition, on the question of the middle classes. I felt a lot myself that a lot of that was becoming like hyper magnified a lot of the time, and maybe was representative of other challenges and other issues that were going on, fears maybe about being in a minority, that kind of thing. And I certainly, for myself at least, I don't think that that represents a barrier to unity. I don't think the question of the transition or the question of the middle classes represents a barrier to unity. The programme questions, although the degree to the specific detail that we should be putting on the transition in the programme, to be honest, I don't think should be extremely detailed. I think a lot of it is based on our historical analysis, and that's useful and that's meaningful to give us a perspective on how things might develop. But we also don't know what the balance of forces would be. We don't know about the strength of the working class. We don't know about the rapidity of the spread of revolution globally. So I don't think it makes sense to be extremely detailed, and it certainly, for me, doesn't represent a barrier to unity. I think one of the things that TAS emphasised a lot in leaving the process was the question of culture. There's a session about culture on Sunday, so hopefully we can explore that a little bit further. But I will just say briefly on the question of culture, I don't want to underplay culture at all, because I think that is extremely important. It's something I've raised myself many times with the CPGB. I'm sure you're all extremely bored of it now, but it is something that I think is extremely important. It's something that I try to make arguments for in organisations, because I think that it has political implications. Things like fighting conservative tendencies, things like fighting the dominance of leaderships. These are cultural questions. What allows us to draw on the strength of a membership? What allows people to import and shape the organisation? These are cultural questions, and they do have implications on the political strength of an organisation. I also feel, as I said to the CPGB, I also do feel like the cultural approach gave a little bit of an open door for TAS to leave the process. I don't think it was, I don't think it's the fundamental question at stake, because, as others have said, the CPGB's culture is fairly well known already. TAS knew about it and had already raised problems with it previously. So it was something that came into the process knowing and understanding. So I do not think that it can be a barrier to unity, and I'll go into that a little bit. But I do think it's a little bit of an easy open door. They want out of the process, maybe the concerns about being in a minority, and some of that behaviour just sort of says, okay, here's the way out if you want it. Here's the justified excuse to leave the process. I think when I've raised these points, Mike and others have raised the, we don't want diplomacy. I don't want diplomacy either. It doesn't mean that we can't make critiques of our cultural approaches. And I also think it's a little bit misleading as well, because when the process started off, the cultural kind of overtures from the CPGB was extremely nice and extremely friendly towards TAS, which sort of took me aback a little bit. And I do feel like there was a change and there was a shift in the approach. Maybe it was around the time that TAS started to begin actively recruiting members, which, again, I feel like I'm nitpicking now, but I think that was problematic as well. Recruiting people to a unity process who are hostile to a unity process, I don't think is the correct thing to be doing. And it did create problems in the process as well. So yeah, in terms of the culture, I think practically speaking, it makes things quite difficult in a unity process if people struggle with that level of trust, if there isn't clear, accurate reporting. I think personally there were problems with the reporting on both sides, from the CPGB and from TAS. Some of the stuff about TAS don't want a programme, TAS don't think there's a transition period. I attended all of those meetings and I never heard anything to me that I would report in that manner. But on the other side, TAS in its reporting just omitted a lot of details that were extremely significant. So we had our first in-person meeting in London, and at the meeting, Jack and Mike disagreed with each other on a number of points, on the question of whether democracy is a form of the state, on the national question, on the question of whether we call the transition period the period of workers' rule or socialism. So there were a number of points of disagreement where Mike agreed with TAS during those discussions. To me, that's quite significant, because that tells you that if discipline is dissolved and we move to a founding conference, there's going to be differences within the CPGB on questions of programme. There's going to be votes going different ways, but not reporting, which TAS didn't report those differences to the TAS membership. Not reporting that reinforces the idea that the CPGB is a monolith, and therefore we're going to lose everything when we come to the conference, and you're just going to get squashed over. So I feel, for me, that felt quite politically significant. And in Prometheus write-up, we did highlight those differences because it did feel meaningful. And I do think that that is part of reporting as well. It's not just the problems with caricaturing someone's position, but it's also the problems with omission, what you leave out as well. But having said all these things about culture, I fundamentally believe that it cannot be a reason that we do not unite with each other. Because if we make it into that reason, then it has implications for our entire project. Because if anyone has any experience on the far left at all, poor culture is absolutely everywhere. And some of it is much more significant than the questions that we're dealing with right now. The SWP has institutionally covered up sexual abuse. That is far worse than using harsh language towards each other, frankly. And if we're talking about a situation where we want a vision or a project to unite the left and to be in the same organisation with each other, that is going to be a difficult, culturally challenging experience. It's going to be one that isn't perfect straight away, but if we look at the way that cultural change occurs, cultural change and transformation occurs through interaction. It doesn't occur through isolation. It doesn't occur through siloing off from each other. And when you start behaving how I want you to behave, then we can engage with each other. That's not what it looks like, and that's not what it could look like if we want to have an idea of how the left as a whole could be transformed through the process of unity. So yeah, I hear criticisms about culture, and I strongly believe that culture is extremely important, but I do not think that can be a reason not to unite. And on the question of culture, TAS also doesn't have no problems with culture either. People have left TAS because of the critiques of its culture as well. None of us are perfect. None of us are free from these problems, and collectively we transform through the challenging experience of interacting and working together. So those are some of there was the political differences, cultural differences. I wish TAS were here really to kind of have this discussion directly, because I feel it's a more honest approach. But ultimately, I think underpinning it, my own assessment is that they didn't want to be in a minority. And, some of that's practically understandable. If you feel that the stakes are so small that being in a minority is simply, there's no opportunity to appeal to others. There's no opportunity to transform that situation. All you're doing is putting yourself under a discipline of a majority that has shown no signs of changing over 40 years or whatever it might be. So I understand the practical arguments behind it, but ultimately I do agree that we have to find a way to be prepared to be in a minority. And I believe that the opportunity that was represented, there would have been opportunity to engage with the differences that exist within the CPGB. You know, if describing socialism as a mode of production is something that Nick couldn't accept within the programme, Mike had already said that he's voted previously for it to be changed to the period of workers' rule. So there was opportunity there to make those changes and to win people over, and that fundamentally has to be our practice, even if it's extremely difficult and challenging. But yeah, fundamentally, that's my assessment of the process. And I do think, obviously, that is something that we have to think about and consider the implications of going forward. I'll just finish very briefly then by thinking about any positive or practical lessons or any indications of the way forward. So I'm speaking again on Sunday about taking the project of a Communist Party forward. So I'll cover in more depth these points then. So the two ones that I'll cover more on Sunday is that we need to have an active strategy for how we take the project forward. That needs to involve an assessment of the forces on the left. That needs to involve an assessment of trends and developments, what significance that they represent, engagement, practical engagement with people to advance and develop that project. But I'll speak more on that on Sunday. And obviously, things with the New Left Party is obviously going to be quite a significant thing for everybody, and working out what the best opportunity to engage with that is, but also the best opportunity to cohere our own forces to make some kind of substantial engagement through that. But I guess just in assessing the process and what could have been different, there's some things you can't really change, but I definitely agree with what Tina said at the start. For me, definitely the process was missing a practical element of common work, an opportunity for membership or periphery of the organisations to be interacting with each other. I think that's extremely important to build trust together, but also to keep things grounded, to keep things in perspective. For myself, sometimes being in those meetings, it was extremely useful and it was extremely important, but sometimes the discussions seem to be magnified beyond the significance that they represented. And I think having that grounding of practical work, common work together helps to keep things focused and keeps things in perspective. For myself, through the process, obviously, I talked to people a little bit on the Discord group, which is very beneficial for me, but I have, in general, heard little from the membership or periphery of the CPGB about their perspectives on the process, about their thoughts on the process. So I'll finish here and hopefully it will be positive to hear people's thoughts on that, because I've definitely felt like that is something that I've been missing through that. Apologies for the extremely negative assessment, but as Tina said, I think honesty is correct.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. And I think we should say, I mean, this is, you know, what the weekly work as CPGB is about. So we're not just dishing out. I think we also need to hear when things are going wrong. And I think, you know, that's an honest approach is always the best. So over to Jack, please.
Okay, so interesting. I think that I had a sort of similar response to Kat when I think we were online, weren't we? And we had a proposal. I haven't got the microphone apparently. Oh, great. Oh, I need to speak that. Oh.
So, come this way.
Is that
Can you
better?
swap seats?
Yeah.
Is it possible to swap
Yeah.
seats? I think the easiest is also.
Right. Shall I start again? Well, that's
Go on.
a bit more echoey, isn't it? Okay, thanks. I think I had a similar response to Kat. I think we were online. I think you'd convened a meeting, Tina, talking about some educational program. And I have to confess, I can give you my inner feelings. It was, oh my God, an education program. It was going to be, I think the idea was to base something on the mug syllabus. That's why I was actually instructed to go along because we've been told, I don't know whether this is true or not, but this is our understanding, that Nick and Ed, the leaders of talking about socialism from a Marxist point of view, they said that they would talk to anybody but Jack Conrad. So I had to go. Anyway, they were quite prepared to talk to me, which was great. And what was stunning from my angle and pleasing is that Comrade Nick Rack basically said, look, we don't want an education program. What we want is fusion. What we want is fusion talks. And I think you followed, Kat, I think, in terms of the order of speakers. I think I kept my mouth shut until the end. And I think Kat, well, obviously Kat welcomed it, and I certainly welcomed it. So this was, yes, an idea from Taz. I wasn't expecting it. I was very pleased to hear it. Now, in terms of CPGB charm, I think we're pretty charming anyway. I mean, in all honesty, I've known Nick politically for quite a long time. And he used to be editor of Militant. I didn't know him then, but I knew him in the Socialist Alliance when he was, I think, a member of, what do they call them? Independent Socialists, which is something that the Socialist Workers' Party, which was the largest organization in the Socialist Alliance, was really bumming up. Really, we must have independence. They're the future. Either way, he was a close ally of the SWP, and that's how I got to know him. I think he was on the leadership of the Socialist Alliance. We had an automatic representative on the leadership, Marcus Strom. If anyone was here last year, you would know Marcus. Marcus is now back in Sydney, Australia. But the next time I came across Nick, I think he was chair of the founding conference of Respect and was doing lots of high fives. I must admit, I'm not really up with the kids, so he was definitely there, and he was definitely enthusiastic about Respect, and I think he joined the SWP. I think he broke with the SWP and went with Galloway, and that's about the last I heard of him. I think until we came across each other again in Left Unity. And again, well, I say again, in that particular environment, Nick undoubtedly played a positive role. Unlike many in Left Unity, for example, who wanted to ditch the idea of socialism. Imagine that. People on the left saying that socialism is a problem and we should put that on the back burner. Nick founded the Socialist Platform, which was excellent. I think most of our comrades signed up to the Socialist Platform. We went along to the founding meeting of the Socialist Platform, I think with a list of something like 20 amendments to the platform, not as a wrecking exercise, I would stress, but as a genuine, how should you put it, positive contribution We wanted clarity. We wanted better formulation here. We wanted a change there. We weren't going in with hostile intent. And what we were faced with, and this is sort of my negative side, really, of Comrade Nick and what has become TAS, is we were faced with a vote. It's true, it was democratic, to have only indicative votes. I was in favour, in terms of our delegation, of walking. I just thought this was ridiculous. What's the point of a founding conference when the only vote you take, one vote, is not to have any more votes? You can debate what you want, but basically this is sacrosanct. I don't view programs, I don't view platforms as sacrosanct. These things should be changeable, and they should be changeable in the light of political balance, experience. We lost that vote narrowly. Should be said that amongst those voting with Comrade Nick was the Alliance for Workers' Liberty, a social imperialist organization. But we won every other vote bar one. For the one we lost, I couldn't tell you why we won it, why we lost it, excuse me, but we won every other vote. But from our point of view, this was therefore a pretty useless platform. It was a pretty useless organization. If you couldn't change it, if democracy didn't work, and I think we had something like a third of the entire list of signatories in one room, which, given that you're dealing with a sort of petition type organization, is something to celebrate, rather than using Nick's excuse, well, 2/3 of the membership, or whatever you want to call it, 2/3 of those that signed it aren't here. Either way, we established the communist platform, and we got a number of people elected on the leadership of Left Unity, until we split with Left Unity, really about their refusal to engage with the Labour Party, given the election of Jeremy Corbyn. We just thought, well, if you want to declare yourself useless, you've just done it. Okay, so that's the background. So given that background, for a comrade to declare that they're actually for unity and for fusion, the comrades had changed their platform positively, so presumably had a vote on it, from being in favour, what was it, a socialist stroke communist party, and they dropped the socialist and they declared themselves in favour of a communist party. Highly positive as far as we were concerned. Okay, so yes, we started to have, I think, fortnightly meetings. We had meetings on Zoom at I think it was 10 o'clock in the morning. We also had two meetings, one in Camden, one in Manchester, face to face. There's been a lot of stuff about what is it, personal relations and not getting on and not liking each other and stuff like that. I mean, Nick would go on about that, but personally, I've always got on well with Nick. I don't know Ed particularly well, but I get on well with Ed. As far as I'm concerned, he gets on well, at least when we're face to face. I really don't see that myself. You've been at all the meetings. I mean, have we ended up rowing with each other, you know, stomping off with each other, swearing at each other? Kat herself talked about us turning on the charm. Well, I don't think we actually turned it on in terms of some particular effort. No, we had, friendly personal relations. But also what we had, I think, and maybe this is again, I think a difference between myself and Kat. I don't think that the differences that separated us could be called nuances or minor differences. They were important differences. Could they be contained within one organization? Yes, certainly. That is absolutely the case. But, you know, if you have a a view, for example, well, let's just talk about the middle classes. Do the middle classes exist? Well, in my view, they exist. I mean, if you wanted an example of the middle classes in Britain, if I wanted to give an example, if I was only allowed one profession to say, well, that's an example of the middle classes, I would choose people like barristers. And it just so happens, of course, that, well, you know, Mike's laughing, or lawyers, or whatever you want, but barristers. Look, I've watched every episode of Rumpole of the Bailey. If anyone wanted to tell me that's an example of the working class, no, I don't think so. Clearly, what we're dealing with is an intermediate strata. My own family background, for example, is thoroughly petty bourgeois. Right, my dad was a shop owner, ran a small business. He definitely wasn't part of the working class. That didn't mean he was part of the ruling class, but the fact of the matter is that this stratum exists. It exists in Britain. It exists in the advanced capitalist countries. And far from the sort of, at least from the point of view of early Marxism, and we're talking about early Karl Marx, early Friedrich Engels, that class disappearing, that class or that stratum or those classes have been renewed. And certainly in Europe, they've been maintained. That, you know, the peasant class has been maintained as a political decision in order to provide the conservatives in the ruling class with a social base. Now, comrades who come along in Britain, let alone when we're putting forward a European perspective and basically say, well, the middle classes either don't exist or they certainly don't produce any useful services. I think lawyers do, barristers do-ish. My dad, who ran a dry cleaning service, certainly produced useful results, you know, useful goods, right? These people, right, they matter in terms of our strategy. You can't wish them away. In the same way, you know, wouldn't it be lovely? I mean, I read the last couple of letters of the comrades from the SPGB, Small Party of Good Boys, in the Weekly Worker. And wouldn't it be that, you know, we had our resident Stalinist writing a critique, and I thought, well, you know, other than this and other than that, Andrew Northall was spot on. He asked them a straightforward question, and it's relevant to Nick and Ed and Taz. You know, well, okay, you get 51% of the vote in Britain. What do you do? Oh, we wouldn't get 51% of the vote. We'd get an overwhelming majority. I mean, and that is basically the approach of Taz. That, you know, that the middle classes, opposition, don't matter. Socialism is such a wonderful idea. You'll have an overwhelming majority. You don't need a transition period really of any time or of any duration. Talking about a generation, 2 generations, as I have, that leaves people in the petty bourgeois sector still exploited. Oh, terrible. Yes, it's true. It does. On the other hand, if you don't deal with the likelihood of sections of the working class, crucially sections of the middle classes siding with reaction in a revolutionary situation and in a post-revolutionary situation, I don't view that as a minor difference. I view that as a major difference. You know, if you view it as a minor difference, then you wouldn't have the view that we do in terms of our program, not of merging with the middle classes, not of ignoring the differences between the working class and the middle classes. They exist, they are real, but the working class, where it's got the opportunity, should champion the interests of the middle class against monopoly capital, against the state. These aren't minor differences. They're incorporable into an organization, but clearly those differences would have to be argued out. In the same way, I was talking to Comrade Tam in the bog just a few minutes ago, and you were talking about the article in this week's Weekly Worker on nature. Well, exactly. Here we are faced with a climate crisis. Here we are faced with a situation. I don't know, what's the latest? Civilization goes into crisis, according to various actuaries, not left-wing, demagogues or something like that. Civilization itself goes into crisis, they're saying, something like 2070. This is the result of capitalism. And if you look at the draft program that the comrades have produced, you don't find that in there. You don't find anything concrete. You don't have a minimum program. What you have is something that precisely resembles, and this is what we were fearful of, you have something that resembles the program of the Socialist Party of Great Britain. Capitalism is bad, socialism is wonderful. In terms of a transition from one to the other, it's no problem. It will be over. We'll basically socialize, we'll nationalize everything. And this will be, again, in the words of their draft program, a shining example that everyone else in Europe and everyone else around the world aspires to emulate. In our view, quite the opposite. If you are isolated in Britain, if you're in that situation of where you aren't coordinating with Europe, far from being an inspiration, you become a lesson. You become an object of a warning sign. So these differences aren't tiny, aren't small. We're not just talking about, I don't know, the equivalent of a left-wing version of how many angels dance on, the proverbial pinhead. No, these differences are important. And what we argued, I think from the beginning of our exchanges, is yes, we need a fusion conference. No one put a date on it. No one said soon. We all emphasized, I think if anyone was impatient, it was more Kat than me and Mike, but so be it. We basically said, look, let's take it as slow as necessary, as fast as possible. And we thought it would be a slow process. And we certainly thought that Communist University would precisely be the opportunity of where comrades, not in the leadership, would get together, talk to each other, say that one's an arsehole, that one's all right, though. They can, they would discover the organization precisely at Communist University. Okay, so why did it go wrong? I don't know. I mean, genuinely, I could start, making aspersions and say, oh, it's Nick Rack. I've been told by various comrades, Nick just wants his own small group, or maybe he wants his own big group. I don't know. I think you're right that, isn't it interesting that we can come across each other in the Socialist Alliance? We can come across each other in respect. We can come across each other in left unity. Okay, we ended up splitting in left unity. We have no problem in joining these broad fronts. I think we were together in the Labour Party. Well, who wasn't in the Labour Party in Britain, under Corbyn? So we have no difficulty in that sense of being in the same organization. Why can't we be in the same communist organization? If I was going to give an explanation, I think that Kat put a finger on it to some degree accurately. And that is, if you look at what calls itself, we are not the CPGB, but we are. But precisely, he came across us. I think we had a school down in South London somewhere where we had him speaking. I can't remember where the hell it was. But he's known us for a long time. That's the point I'm making. And that's why I've given some background. And he knows our strength, or should we put it more accurately, our weakness, right? If the CPGB, or what calls itself the CPGB today, didn't just have a room with this many comrades in it, hopefully more comrades will be turning up throughout the week and all the rest of it, but if we had 2,000, if we could, have the same sort of number as the 5,000 strong SWP does in halls, I don't think he would hesitate for a moment in joining. I don't think he would hesitate in joining and say, I'll be in a minority. And maybe I can find myself, I don't know whether Mike's ears were burning when you were talking about us having differences, but maybe Nick can align himself with Mike McNair in a, let's call it a workers' state faction. I'm joking, but why not? Why not? Because co-thinkers automatically converge. Co-thinkers automatically find themselves together and will be arguing, if not around just 1 point, maybe 10 points, maybe 20 points. There's nothing wrong with that. But the prospect, yes, of unity in a tiny organization, okay, I agree with Kat, it is bizarre recruiting people who are bitterly opposed to the CPGB and everything we stand for into TAS in the middle of fusion talks. Either way, if we were substantially bigger, not just with 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 more individuals, but 100, 200, 300, 400 more members, I don't think Nick and I don't think a lot of other comrades on the left would hesitate for a moment before they joined us and accept, as I've argued, their position as a minority. Now, okay, we also made the argument, and it's a real one. We are sincere. We would accept the position of being in a minority. We accept that being in a majority is much nicer. We accept that being in a minority is frustrating sometimes, but so be it. It's natural in a political organization to find yourself sometimes in a minority. And from our point of view, we would have been prepared to do that. Now, again, when it came to program, we would have to judge that. And I say we, because if you look at the CPGB, we've got a comrade chair who said, well, I rejoined the CPGB, but I have differences. I wanted to stress that. That's natural, isn't it? And therefore, in that sense, what you can actually find is those who begin in a majority can very easily find themselves in a minority. And we certainly put forward the pledge, it's a real one, that if we had a fusion conference, we would dissolve our discipline. And that doesn't mean you don't have co-thinkers, but we wouldn't be doing what we've done in the Socialist Alliance, in respect, in left unity, sitting on the left, sitting at the front, hands go up, at least one hand goes up, and then all hands go up, and they talk about, why do you keep voting as a block? And, we say, well, if you give us more than 2 minutes to talk about this, we'll explain the advantages of discipline to you. Either way, we wouldn't have done that in a fusion conference. What we will be talking about is individual members, great, individual members, but with the commitment, right, to abiding by majority votes, right? That means us as well as them. So I don't know, Kat, I don't know. My own feeling was that you're right, that when it came to reporting, when it came to polemics, you could find many, if you wanted excuses, there's your excuse. I refuse to be called someone who, I don't know, what's my latest on Nature? A Lassallian. I refuse to be called a Lassallian on the question of nature. This is an insult to my Marxism. I can't possibly stand for that. So yes, you will find in our polemics. I mean, certainly with Mike, I mean, your description of most of the left, and I think I agree with it, if you wanted to give it a historical label, Bakunanism, streets and strikes, action, sod elections, that's a side issue. Sod building up a mass organization, small organization, the revolutionary elite. Well, Mike has called TAS an example of that. So if you wanted to find something, you will find it. But I think that's inevitable. And I also think it's inevitable. However hard you tried, you know, you're going to produce something if you do a report that someone will disagree with. Now, I do remember in the early days, I would send you, Nick, and Ed, you know, my articles, and I usually get back, well, that is wrong, and I'll change it. As you know, temperature increased, I stopped doing that because I just thought this is a waste of time. But nonetheless, you know, with the best will in the world, you're not going to do it accurate. You're not going to do it with 100% accuracy, or you're not going to do it, you know, to 100% pleasing someone who's on the other side of your polemic. That just is not going to happen. But I agree with Kat. You know, these are things you've just got to live with in politics. And I don't think myself that an organization, I don't know, of 1,000, 2,000, 10,000, 2 million will have a substantially different culture when it comes to reporting, when it comes to polemics. Indeed, I would expect an organization that's huge would have fierce arguments, fierce polemics, precisely because the stakes, you know, that are there are so much more immediate. You go from a situation where I've been talking about the middle classes, nature, the transition, clearly a way off question. But if you're 2 million, it's an immediate question, and you wouldn't be, I think, exchanging politenesses. I think you'd be exchanging extremely, how should I put it, hot, extremely passionate arguments, simply because the future of the working class depends on it. And we should be passionate about the future of our working class, as we should be passionate about the future of our planet. I'll finish with that. Thank you.